Today we're going to be talking about a tool called specific versus diffuse. This tool is useful in understanding how people converse, how people talk, or even how people write. We all have a sort of natural way in which we speak and write. And I'm going to talk about two different styles of speaking: specific and diffuse. Let me take an example. Let's say I go get myself a cup of coffee, and I find the coffee not warm enough, it's lukewarm. I could say something like, good coffee should be at least 80 degrees centigrade. This is a very specific statement. Now you might think 80 degrees centigrade is too hot. That'll be scorching. Gosh, I'd have to wait a long time before it cools down. I can take a sip. You might disagree with that. Specific statements are very specific to the point where the people listening to it can find themselves agreeing or disagreeing. Diffuse statements are a little different. I could get that cup of coffee, again the same situation. I could say, good coffee is always better when it's nice and warm. That statement is more diffuse, and it is likely that most people would agree with it. There would be general agreement with that statement. But the statement didn't take a really specific position. It was a very diffuse statement, and therefore it is easy to agree with. There are pros and cons to both styles of conversations. Now, some people are more likely to be very specific in their communication. Others are more likely to be diffuse in their communication. Usually, somebody who is specific doesn't usually mind that others disagree, because over their life they've been specific all along, and a fair number of times people have disagreed. They have learned to kind of cope with that. People who are diffuse are typically not very comfortable when there is disagreement. In fact, when there is disagreement, they might even change their statement to be a little bit more diffuse to encompass that position of that individual. The specific speakers might in fact antagonize the audience by now creating polarized camps. The diffuse speakers are trying to find a common ground on which both of us can agree. There's pros and cons to both. Understanding whether you are specific or diffuse in your communication is very valuable, because it tells you how you normally behave and when you should try and behave a little bit the other way when it is appropriate. You can be intentional about that. But you can also be intentional about how others react to you. To understand that, let's look at what happens when a speaker, who is either specific or diffuse, speaks, and the listener, who is either specific or diffuse, listens. A specific speaker speaking to a specific listener, both of them are going to say, okay, now what do you say? What do I think? And the speaker is going to assert, and the listener is going to evaluate. Do I agree or not? This is the mode in which that conversation will occur. In contrast, if the listener was diffuse, the same speaker, when they speak, they still assert, but the diffuse listener is considering, is there some place in this person's statement that I can find common ground? They are considering. On the other hand, if the speaker is diffuse and the listener is specific, then the speaker is exploring, because they're making a very broad statement. And in this exploration, the listener is going, do I agree with that? The listener is still evaluating. When the speaker is diffuse and the listener is diffuse, they are both exploring and they're agreeing. Is one better than the other? Not necessarily. Every one of these four quadrants have positives and they have negatives. But understanding in your own communication style, whether you are specific or diffuse, being cognizant of your audience, particularly if it's one or two people, whether they are specific or diffuse, will allow you to be more intentional about how you wish to communicate. Ask yourself this question: are you specific or diffuse in your communications?